It's the Blue Vote Cafe, a little bit wonkish, a whole lot of fun. I'm David Schellenberg along with Rachel Wigster. We're the co-chairs for Democrats Abroad in Canada's capital region of Ottawa. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, David. I'm laughing because you gave my last name a little extra emphasis, and I'm wondering if it's because you've been looking at the AI transcripts that get spat out every time you upload our audio, and my name, it never gets my name right, ever.
Ever, no. It makes you wonder about the world of AI, and on the other hand, I'm in many ways I'm more impressed by how much it gets right compared to how much it gets wrong, because every now and then there's a bunch of stuff in there that it's words that I would not have thought it could get the spelling of. It's some nuances that I wouldn't have thought it would have caught. Yeah, the end of. And yet
we still need the human in the equation to fix the very the wrong names and the incredibly wrong interpretations sometimes.
Yep, exactly. At least for now. Who's with us today, Rachel?
Today in the cafe, we're joined by Natasha Esponda, who is an attorney and a member of Democrats Abroad. And maybe I won't mention the topic that we had floated to each other that we might talk about, but we'll just get into it naturally. So welcome, Natasha. We're very glad to have you in the cafe.
And I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We usually start by asking our guests where in the world they are, what took them there and what keeps them there, and what state they vote out of.
Ooh, I love those questions. So I'm currently living in Paris, the Paris region. Can we edit the part out where I'm divorced? Can we edit this out?
It's your choice. Yeah, we can be as personal or as formal as you prefer here.
Okay, no worries. So, yes, I live in Paris. I moved here in 2020 in the pandemic. I did a master's. Yeah, I did a master's at the Sorbonne in European law, and I've lived here since. I've recently gotten really involved in politics in the Paris region, American politics abroad, Democrats abroad specifically. I vote in Connecticut because I went to law school in Connecticut. Cool. And what was your other question?
Well, what took you to Paris and what keeps you in Paris, I guess, is
it's Paris.
Yes,
Paris. I mean, what can I say? It's Paris.
No more reason than that.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, do you ever need an excuse for Paris? So I'm working here. I'm a professor at a few different universities. Specifically, I don't teach law students, but I teach legal related concepts to business professionals, including negotiation and contracts for business people. I teach things like branding insights, which does a lot with copyright, basically looking at the ways in which storytelling is very important. That, as a previous trial lawyer, which I did in the United States, is very useful. Yeah, and I'm here because I love Paris. So.
That's awesome. And so you qualified on the U.S. side of the border, but you're now also acquainted with European law.
Yes, I have a master's in European law from the Sorbonne, where I graduated with high honors, but I'm a member of the Connecticut bar and the New York bar.
Fantastic.
Well, yes, it's funny. That was exactly what I was thinking. What's something significant that's different in European law than American law?
Oh, good question.
God, where do I start?
Well, the good ones.
Yes, well, I'll tell you before you plunge in, we have different kinds of law in Canada. We have Napoleonic law in Quebec, and the rest of Canada is under whatever the system is. Do you know what it's called, David? The British system. But not to deflect from your answer to David's question, what is the difference between the two?
So, I mean, there's a lot of differences, right? Because we have two different legal systems that we're looking at. But within those legal systems, there's federal concepts. And we have state right. So in the United States, we have state laws, which are local laws. A good example of these right now, we're going to get right into politics, would be the right to have an abortion, right? So some states, like Connecticut, have the right to have an abortion enshrined in the Constitution. States have made it illegal, right? So in the United States, we have different state laws, and then we have the federal laws, right? So the federal laws are anything that would violate a federal statute that has to do with, so it's what Congress passes federal laws, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the American system. And then we have the European system. So we have the state laws, local ordinances, federal laws within each country. But then the European Union is almost akin to its own federal system, right? And what they have the European Parliament, which comes together and makes laws. And so there's not only European laws, there's federal laws, and then there are statewide laws within like the provinces of France. For example, like I live in the Paris region. Paris has specific laws that would be different from what you would find in the Marseille region. Are they huge differences? No, not particularly. But European law standardizes law across different countries so that the laws of Spain and the laws of France would relatively be harmonious, right? So there's a lot of differences. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. We see this a lot in what we call the four freedoms, which are the four freedoms of the European Union. So the whole reason that the European Union was created was because there was a war on the continent, right? And so in order to prevent war from breaking out again, World War II in specific, and this is what it was specifically aimed at. They were like, okay, we need to tie the economies together, and specifically France and Germany. I think the European, if I'm mistaken, cut this out. I think it started as like a organization, honestly, and then it like expanded. It has a weird history, but it's the history of the European idea. Like Europe as a continent is also standardized with legal principles, right? So that's European law. The way that I understand European law, the way that I use it is I teach European law business practices, right? So there's a lot of regulations that are standardized, environmental regulations that are standardized. Right. What does that look like in the business sphere? So that's a brief overview. We can take a whole master's if you would
Absolutely.
like.
Well, you're making me think about like GDPR, which
yes.
Democrats abroad must abide by, even if we're in a place like Canada that has its own privacy laws and that aren't necessarily as strict as GDPR. But because we're a global organization, we all have to abide by that one because it's the most protective.
Yes, absolutely. So I think you're talking about the General Data Protection Regulation, and it is my understanding that anything that even touches the European Union or could have anything regarding the collection of data within the European Union is highly protected.
Exactly.
I do teach a little bit on this, but not until November. So I'll have to refresh and get back.
Well, let's go on to the topic that
well, wait, one more quick global question. Okay.
Sure.
Is it the Gulf of America or the Gulf of Mexico, globally speaking? Like who?
I mean, I think it's whatever you find in your heart.
Okay.
You follow the end. No, it's obviously the Gulf of Mexico. Come on.
But who picks in a case like that? Like how is that a legal thing that the world all comes together and decides, or can one country just kind of arbitrarily make those decisions for other things?
I don't know. Huh? That's a really good question. I think the Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico thing, I think it was done by like a executive order. Let's look this up. Gulf of Mexico renaming. It's a fundamental legal skill, the ability to Google
and talk at the same time. But
yes,
it's when you were talking about different countries with different laws, but yet a uniformity across all of them. Like it's interesting that countries can work together like that, but there must be instances, and that was the first one that came to mind, where one country decides something and the rest of the world goes, no.
Yes, yeah.
So absolutely. And actually, it's a weird thing, and no one ever really knows about this, but there is an Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Obviously, I don't think the Gulf of Mexico's name is a human right, but there are different countries that come together and create international legal systems. Like we do have international law. The U.S. loves to pretend that it doesn't exist,
right.
But in theory, we are bound by certain international treaties. There's like obviously like a very long legal process, which is complex, and how to adopt that into and whether it's ratified properly and all of that stuff. But there are international legal systems that exist. America loves to pretend they don't.
Right.
Which I don't recommend.
I don't think America is the only country that pretends that, though.
Exactly. And we're the only signatories, I think. We're the only non-signatories to the Convention of the Rights of the Child, I think, which is embarrassing in the UN.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. But no, international is very interesting and very robust, and we could talk about this another time.
Okay.
Let's definitely do. I think that would be a great idea. We'll have you back to explore more interesting and convoluted areas of the law.
Exactly.
However, one of the things that's very much in the air these days, especially for American citizens who live outside the country but have family and other things to visit back home, is what happens when you cross the border? How safe is it? What are our rights? What kinds of situations might we encounter? There's a whole raft of questions that arises when people living outside the country are thinking about going home.
Yes. So the first thing I'm going to say is I'm an attorney, but because I'm not hired by anyone specifically or retained in any matter, I hope that no one is taking this as like complete legal advice. I can give you general principles and discuss it as I understand it, but I'm just hoping that
I get all my legal advice from podcasts. Come on.
Who doesn't? I mean, that's the only way to get your information, right?
And you're still a free man, David.
Where facts all come from is podcasts.
But I think there's a certain amount of fear because we hear a lot of stories outside the country about things that happen and Canadians who've been detained. I'm just saying Canada because that's where David and I live. But what should the average American citizen traveling back into the country know about crossing the border? So the first thing I'm going to say, just right off the bat, is that we're living in very uncertain times, right? So we are living in we're living in a context in which there's heightened reasons to be afraid. There's a lot of increased border searches on the people, and we're going to get into those. But yeah, what I would say to people is that there's definitely a few things to be aware of. The first thing is that if you are an American citizen, if you retain U.S. citizenship, you have an absolute right to cross into the border. They cannot deny you entrance into the country, right? The problem that I really see is what happens when you're a U.S. citizen and you're married to a non-U.S. citizen, or you have non-U.S. citizen children, right? Because we do have different rules and standards that apply. So firstly, the first thing to say that's just like off the bat, we have the Fourth Amendment, right? The Fourth Amendment is the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, and it basically says, come back with a warrant. That's the whole idea, that you can't have just random searches and seizures without probable cause, that you need a warrant to do intrusive searches, blah, 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 crim pro, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. However, we have this thing called the border search exception to the Fourth Amendment. And that is this idea, yes, very important concept. And it's the idea that because the U.S. has such a heightened interest in maintaining the safety of the country and at that height, that interest is highest at the border, that the requirements to do a search of someone is lower, right? So this is called the border search exception. Mm-hmm. Physically, it applies within 25 miles of the border. So you can think 25 miles inland of Mexico or below Canada, right?
Right. I didn't know that one. Wow.
Well, I kind of got a hint of it, but we'll get to that in a minute because I will ask you some. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's the border search exception. This also applies at airports, right? And it's basically a doctrine that allows searches and seizures at international borders. So we're not talking Connecticut, New York border. We're not talking the Florida, Alabama, Georgia, whatever is going on down there border, right? It's borders of the United States. And basically it says that you can do a search or a seizure without a warrant or probable cause. Probable cause is the standard mentioned in the Constitution, right? But what we see, so another concept of the border search exception that I think is very important is that the border search exception doctrine is not regarded as an exception to the Fourth Amendment, but rather an exception to the requirement for a warrant or probable cause, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting concept.
Yes.
And what does the Fourth Amendment provide? It provides you protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, right? So the Supreme Court has often cited that they have a border search exception, and it's not just when you're crossing to the border, but it's for a certain amount of there's a certain, I would say, leeway area within the United States that this applies to, right? And this most notably applies to airports, and that's really important. And that's the reason why basically they can do routine searches and seizures at an airport. You go through security, they look in your bag, they scan you, they do the whole dance, you take off your shoes, you don't, they throw out your shampoo, it's a whole thing, right? That's right. So that is an exception to the warrant requirement, to the probable cause requirement, right? Because they don't need probable cause to search any specific person. What they're saying is because this is an international border or just the border in general, that they can search you because it's not considered an invasive search, right? So now we're talking about going into the U.S., right? Yes. So if you're a U.S. citizen, what they can do is they can absolutely ask you questions. CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol, can ask you questions that would establish your identity and ensure that you have citizenship. So if you're a U.S. citizen, you're probably traveling with a passport. As long as you look like the person in your passport, you're fine. what we're seeing now with people who identify as a different gender than they were assigned at birth, they might have some issues. Very unfortunate, in my opinion. So that's an issue that any U.S. citizen might encounter. And then we go to green card holders, right? So what is a green card holder? It's the status of lawful permanent residency, right? So green card holders are allowed to travel outside of the country, right? This is not 100% my specialty, but I know a little bit about this. And basically what CPB can do when you're trying to enter the country, when you're trying to cross the border, is they can ask you questions to establish your identity and establish your permanent residency, right? You cannot be denied entry into the U.S. for failure to answer other questions, right? So they can't ask you about your race, your religion, other things. And they cannot. So what we're seeing right now, and this is the really big issue, especially with Latino populations traveling from Mexico and South America and Central America, is that they might be green card holders. They might not be in violation, but what happens is they get cornered by CPB and they're forced to sign what we call an I-407, which is a voluntary relinquishment of a green card, right? Why does this happen? Yeah, because they want to, it's a quota, right?
Right. Yes.
So that's an issue. But this is only in the instance that you have a green card, that you have lawful permanent residency status that was granted through the U.S. government, through the processes of obtaining a green card. The next issue is whether you're a non-citizen, right? Or you're a visitor, or you're a non-citizen visa holder. Refusing to answer questions, establishing your identity, why you're there, purpose of travel, all of those questions, those can cause delay, and Border Patrol agents retain a great discretion to deny you into the country. Officers, in theory, are not allowed to select you for religion, race, national origin, gender, ethnicity, or political beliefs. However, we are seeing that they're doing that. And specifically, we're seeing that in the cases of religion and political beliefs, right? They're theoretically not allowed to do it. But that's the issue this is where we are as a country, right? Theoretically, things are not supposed to happen, but they are happening. So people can ask you, and I'm not saying it won't happen, they're not supposed to, but it might happen that they ask you about your race, your religion, your ethnicity, your political beliefs, and you may be denied entrance into the country, right?
Even though you've got a clear passport, clear citizenship, they can still deny you entry?
If you are a non-citizen and a non-visa holder. Okay. So we're talking, say you have a Canadian spouse who doesn't have a green card or doesn't have you're a non-citizen visa holder, say you're on a NESTA. Yes, they can deny you entry, and they retain a broad discretion, I believe, to deny entrance to the country. If you're a U.S. citizen, it has been litigated. They cannot deny you entry into the United States so long as you have established your identity and citizenship, right? Yep. Green card holders, lawful permanent residents are kind of in the middle. They're kind of in flux. So this is at the border, right? And we're seeing this. I just want to caution, there are established laws, there are established practices. I would not count on the rights of those traveling into the border to be protected by those in CPB. I don't think we're in a period in history in which adherence to the Constitution is considered the utmost standard in which they're following. You see? Right.
In fact, I was going to ask, if you're a citizen, you can't be denied entry, but can they just simply hold you at the border?
Yeah, they can absolutely delay you. If you've established your identity and citizenship, I don't know for what amount of time they can hold you, but we can look it up. How long U.S. citizen be detained port of entry? Again, it's a phenomenal skill. So the right is unequivocal, and no matter where an individual has traveled, the duration of their absence, they cannot be denied entry. I know that, but
But can they say, well, you're going to be staying here tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they can, and I'm sure they will. And this is the question. It's not a question of like what is allowed under the Constitution, what's allowed under established doctrine. It's what they will do, right?
What they will do, or what they might do.
Yeah, I personally, I didn't have issues last time I went to the United States. I did get asked about my employment, which was kind of weird because I was unemployed at the time, which didn't feel great to say, but exactly. But I haven't heard of too many difficulties, and I think for the most part it's pretty routine. But I would definitely exercise a higher level of caution when traveling through the border. Also, if you're planning to drive down through Canada, the same questions, the same issues might apply to you. Yes,
for sure.
Do you, and I know there's other things, but just because I've always been curious, for those of us who carry more than one passport, I've had different encounters at the border on which passport they want to see, and if they want to see more than one passport, and if I'm required to show them more than one passport. So I've taken to just traveling under my Canadian one because I like it. But do I have to have my American passport when I cross the border in the United States?
It is my belief that you must enter and leave the United States with your U.S. passport. I am almost certain about that.
Right.
So what I've been told by an immigration lawyer was you travel into the country on the passport that belongs to that country because it gives you certain rights. Like you go into the U.S. on your Canadian passport, You're not signaling that you have the rights of a U.S. citizen. And same on the way back, you show the Canadian passport as you cross into Canada. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm much less of a lawyer than Natasha. I'm just telling you what
my Canadian passport identifies that I was born in the United States. So
that is true.
But I guess it doesn't identify citizenship.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing about being born in the United States is we have a family friend who was born in the United States but is Swiss and got citizenship through birthright citizenship and lived in Switzerland. He voluntarily relinquished his American citizenship because of the tax requirements. So being born in the United States isn't sufficient to establish that you're a U.S. citizen.
Right.
I mean, it's a pretty good indication that at one point you were.
Exactly.
But that alone is insufficient, just off the top of my head. But exercise a high degree of caution when passing the border. That's all I can say. Make sure that if you have your passports, have copies. We're dealing with really uncertain times here, right? I'm not going to beat around the bush. This is a very scary time to be in the United States. And also, this is the other thing that I would like to say to all the listeners. Right now, we are enjoying the maximum amount of rights that we will have for quite some time. Right. So right now, our rights are at their strongest and they will be for quite some time. Right. So I would just say, we really should be cautious when thinking about the ways in which we're going to go through the United States and what we're going to say, but also don't live in fear. You cannot live your life in fear. We have strong protections. Those protections are waning every day. But as we are right now, you still have the right to enter the United States as an American citizen. If you have an ESTA, you can be denied entry, but so long as you adhere to the standards and regulations that are required, it should be okay. I can't guarantee it, but I think for now it's probably okay.
Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Hold on, what's an ESTA?
Go ahead. Oh,
an ESTA is a European travel visa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so my friends that live in Spain, they get an ESTA when they go to the U.S.
Gotcha.
Right. So I was going to ask about an experience my husband and I had. We've been into the U.S., I think, 3 or 4 times since January, and have not had a problem crossing into the U.S. But coming back the last time, we hit a checkpoint. And this it was definitely within 25 miles of the border, but we had not yet reached the Canadian border. And they had actually blocked one of the lanes with a big semi. So they, in other words, reduced the traffic to a single lane. And there was a long line of cars, and they were checking everyone's ID and looking in everyone's trunks. And there was, everyone was armed. It was Customs and Border Patrol. They were in uniforms. They all had weapons, and one of them had a semi-automatic pointed toward the line of cars, which was scary. When they approached our car, they took our passports. They took photographs of our passports on their cell phones, which I thought was, yeah. And then they asked, the first question they asked was, do you have anything to declare? Now, that's a standard question as you're going into a country, but not as you're leaving a country. So we were confused. And she clarified large sums of money, tobacco, guns, no to all the above. And then she asked if she could look in the back of our car. And my husband read later that is something you can say no to, but we've been talking about it since. Had he said no, would things have gotten tenser? I don't know. So I guess I wanted your thoughts about that sort of situation. You're leaving the country. We are citizens. We were able to show U.S. passports, and we're about to show our Canadian passports at the Canadian border. But I'm sure they're looking for people who aren't in the country legally.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to quote my wonderful criminal procedure professor, Miguel de Figueiredo, in which he told me great advice. absolutely never ever agree to a search. Never. There's no good that can come of it. Absolutely not. Do they make it seem that you cannot say no? Of course they do. Mm-hmm. That is part of the tactic, but you do retain the right to say no to a search. That has been litigated, and that cannot be used to then establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause. So your refusal to consent to a search, it's called the consent. It's consent to a search, cannot be used then to say, oh, there's something suspicious here. I am therefore going to search, right? Okay. So my advice is say no. I know it's scary. I know it's weird. Yeah. But that is my advice. But listen, they know what power they have. They know how it works. They know that you're scared, that they have a semi-automatic pointed to you, right? Yeah. But you do retain the right to refuse a search. Okay. If they're asking to search your trunk, that is probably because they have not yet established reasonable suspicion or whatever standard they would have needed, depending on where you are in the country. Although the border, the motor vehicle search exception allows for reasonable suspicion because you can drive away with evidence. In theory, that is the standard rule, right? But yeah, you can say no. You absolutely can say no. Is it scary? Absolutely, and I understand why you would just say sure, especially if you think you have nothing to hide. But you should say no. You had no large sum of money in the car.
But aren't they just going to detain you?
Whatever you're doing in the U.S., it's none of my business. You know.
But I think the reason I would say yes to that sort of search is because I know I have nothing to hide, and it'll take them a minute and a half, and they'll be done the search, and then I'll be on my way. If I say no to the search, then I'm going to assume I'm going to be there for several hours.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, good advice, always say no. Absolutely not. But also they can't establish, they might pull you aside. They might try to harass you. They cannot use that to then establish reasonable suspicion. That's been litigated. And if they do, then you can fight that in a court. Listen, I can only tell you what my wonderful criminal procedure professor told me.
Right.
Which is to never consent to a search, never do it. There's nothing good that can come of it. You do retain that right to consent whether or not you would like to, Okay. But it is a scary time we're living in, and people don't really understand that you do have the right to refuse a search.
No. And in fact, my husband remembered that the ACLU has guidelines, and he went and read about it afterward, once we were safely back in Canada. And maybe, I don't know, I assume you've looked at them. Maybe that's something people should be carrying so that you have it right there. We would have had time to read them before the agent reached our car.
Well, I cannot recommend reading any literature by the ACLU enough because everything they put out is phenomenal, and I use it all the time in my lectures. The ACLU is very concerned with the liberties of the people. They are the American Civil Liberties Union, and they publish wonderful literature. They also have really good Know Your Rights leaflets for students. When I was in law school, I worked with underprivileged students who were, subject to what is it? Search and frisk. I forget.
Right. Stop and frisk.
Stop and frisk. I was American at one point, and I still am. But do I speak English anymore? No, I don't. Yes. So yes, we would basically tell them their rights to be like, hey, like you don't need to consent to this. Tell them it's like, do you have reasonable suspicion? Do you have probable cause? Like, what are you doing this? They can ask you your name. They can ask for a piece of identification, but the rights that they have are really not as strong. The abilities of the police to search you, to create a seizure are not as strong as they appear, right? You enjoy a lot of rights. People forget that they have a lot of rights. The Constitution, as it was originally drafted, was intended to protect people from warrantless search and seizure, come back with a warrant. You can't just randomly, unprovoked search my things. And that's an important thing that we should really remember. We have the right to privacy.
Now, is there a difference? I mean, Rachel's asking a very Canadian question because Canadians drive back and forth across the border all the time. But if you're flying into the United States from basically any other country other than Canada or Mexico, you're still go through a search just as part of security for the airplane.
Yes.
So what's the difference between that search and what the border customs search would be?
So, it's the same. It's CPB. So we're talking about customs and border. Well, you're going into the United States, right? Are you talking about like a search at an airport leaving?
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that airport security is there's airport security, which includes potentially a fairly detailed search, and then there's border security through an airport, which is that a different search entirely by different people?
Yeah. So the reason they can search you just like randomly at an airport is because it's considered a non-invasive search, right? And just by virtue of being in an airport with security, it's something that you consent to. I don't know the constitutional basis of that.
Like when you go through those metal detectors and take off your shoes and all the rest of it,
but it's a non-invasive search, right? So they don't need probable cause to do that.
Right.
It's called a routine search and seizure. So it's not CPB asking your passport. It's not CPB saying like, hey, like, why are you here? What's your purpose of travel? Are you a resident here? Where are you traveling to? Where are you staying? All of that. But just by virtue of being in an airport, they can do a routine search and seizure, because it's considered non-invasive. I mean, the most invasive thing they ask you to do is to take off your shoes, right? They need a higher standard if they're going to do a strip search.
Right. And I mean, a lot of that stuff was put in place after a lot of airplane hijackings and bombings. So, I mean, I think a lot of it was to make sure no weapons were smuggled onto a plane that could then be turned against the people on it.
Absolutely, but I'm just trying to understand the difference. Difference in the type of search. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So CPB is searching specifically, and they're very concerned with immigration status, right? I mean, they're concerned with other things. They're concerned with security at the border. But when you're going through just like random airport security, it's called a routine search, and a government can just conduct routine searches without any suspicion of wrongdoing, just because it's considered non-invasive, right? Because they just scan you and then you go through.
Okay.
Exceptionally invasive searches, courts require reasonable suspicion. But remember, CPB is concerned with what's coming in the country. If you're just leaving the country, they're trying to guarantee the safety of the airplane. I'm not sure the constitutional basis of this. Again, we can Google. But it serves a different purpose, right? Because when you're flying out of a country, CPB doesn't really care. I mean, I'm sure they have some vested interest in making sure that people aren't coming in and out willy-nilly, but CPB is really concerned with what's happening going into the country.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a question for going in. How concerned should we be about what's on our phones and laptops?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked, because again, to shout out my wonderful professor of criminal procedure, he loved this question because there is a circuit split. Right. So the seminal case on this, right, because cell phones have not been around that long. Right. So it's a fairly new question. There's a seminal case called Riley versus California, and the Supreme Court there addressed whether cell phone searches that occur incident to lawful arrest, which is you get arrested and they look through your phone, are exempted from the warrant requirement. Right. So basically, like if you're arrested randomly because of whatever reason, they can give you a little pat down to make sure you don't have a weapon. They can look around the vehicle to make sure that the police aren't in immediate danger. Right. And they said, okay, no, like the government argued, hey, like we can look at this. We can look at your phone because it's just incident to a lawful arrest. Right. There, Justice Roberts stressed that cell phones have a remarkable characteristic in that they have there's a high interest in privacy of the cell phone. Why? Because we have a ton of data. And he rejected the argument that cell phones are like other objects on an arrestee's person, and said that cell phones differ in both a quantitative and qualitative sense, since many cell phones are in fact mini computers that have the capacity to be used as a telephone, right? And telephone recording conversations, all of that has been litigated since the 60s of what they can and cannot do.
Right.
My understanding and the way that my view of the Fourth Amendment is that the Fourth Amendment should be interpreted to guarantee the same amount of privacy that you would have had at the time of drafting. So we can think of a cell phone like a desk, right? We can think of all the files you have in your desk. Obviously, the police cannot just come in here and start rifling through your stuff, right? In the same way that it makes sense that your computer, your cell phone, all of your information with files should not be just randomly rifled through, right?
Right.
So the privacy intrusion, which is so high, resulting from a cell phone search without a warrant, means, the privacy intrusion that would result from a cell phone search is too high to not occur without a warrant, right? So they can search your phone, but they have a warrant, right? But this is not at the border. And we're going to come back to it, but it's important to understand, right? Warrantless searches of a cell phone in general, incident to lawful arrest, are not allowed. We know that. So we also have a question of whether cell phone records by a third party, like collected by Verizon, for example, can be gathered without a warrant. And the answer is no, right? Because we have a doctrine. There's a doctrine that excludes business records, right? And the court said that no, these records of a cell phone are not like business documents, business records routinely kept, right? You do need a warrant because of the invasion of privacy, right? In this case called Carpenter v. US, which I want to say was in 2018 or 2019, but do not quote me on that. There was a question of whether exigent circumstances, which is an emergency situation, would allow for a warrantless access to cell phone location data. So there's some wiggle room there, right? But this is important doctrine to understand. Right now, as it stands, we have a U.S. circuit split, right? So there are different circuits. So I practice law in the Second Circuit, which is New York, Vermont, and Connecticut, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So there's different circuits, which are the federal interpretations of law. It's like the second step in, you have a federal court, just like a trial court, federal trial court. Then you have appellate courts, then you have circuit courts, and then you have the Supreme Court, right? Right. And so they're within circuits. So courts are grappling with the border search problem on two issues. So first, there's a dispute of over whether reasonable suspicion is required to justify a search of the cell phone records. We talked about reasonable suspicion being a lower standard than probable cause, right? So probable cause means that there has to be, it's probable cause. There has to be something that would indicate that there's like crime or criminal activity afoot or something that the government would have a legitimate interest in, right? Reasonable suspicion is lower than that. I've heard, and you can't quote me on this, even this is on a podcast, reasonable suspicion probably is like you're 25% sure. Probable cause is probably like 40 to 50. Right. And then, so this is, you don't 100% need to know that there's criminal activity or evidence that would indicate criminal activity or something that the government would have an interest in. But it's kind of suspicious. And the thing is that it has to be articulatable, articulatable, which means that the police can't say, oh, this guy looks sketch and I had a feeling. No, they have to say like, well, what they do is say, I've had 15 years of experience as a federal officer and I thought something was afoot. But they have to say for some reason, right? They have to give some kind of indication as to why there's reasonable suspicion. Right. So federal courts have confronted the issue and they currently agree that manual searches, like looking at the immediately available contents, are permissible and don't require reasonable suspicion or a warrant, right? So now we'll get to the juicy bits. So there's 3 courts of appeal, right? So the first, the fourth, and the 9th, they have concluded that advanced searches of a cell phone or electronic data are non-routine and require reasonable suspicion, right? So that's what they said. They said, okay, the 1st, 4th, and 9th, and the 9th is California. If they're going to plug your phone in and suck all the data off and see all the deleted information and see all your selfies and all of that, that is a non-routine search that requires reasonable suspicion. Okay. Weirdly enough, the 11th Circuit, which I believe is like Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, has concluded the exact opposite and basically held that cell phone searches, whether manual or advanced, are routine searches and they can be conducted without reasonable suspicion, right? So, right, it's weird. So we have a question, right? So it really depends as to where you're flying into. That's the weirdness of this, right? So if we're talking about a forensic search, whether or not they can search what's on your phone is subject to where you're flying into. Wow. Yeah, no, it's weird, right? And that's why it was the question on my criminal procedure exam.
Right. So if you're flying into Vermont, you are more protected than if you're flying into somewhere in the 11th Circuit. And of course, those states went right out of my head.
So it's New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. I just worked at the Second Circuit. It is my belief that the district courts have ruled, I'm not sure how far it's reached, but that they require a warrant, and therefore warrantless searches of a cell phone in the border when flying into the border would be unconstitutional. That is my understanding as it is now, but let me look at this.
Crazy.
Well, and then and deeper to that, do the rules change if you are an American citizen versus you're not an American citizen?
I believe they do. I believe that there's, I will have to look this up, but I believe that U.S. citizens have the highest protections and that currently non-U.S. citizens enjoy lesser rights to privacy. The thing is also, so, I mean, the question is, what do you have on your cell phone? You as an American citizen still enjoy the right to free speech. You know what I mean? Like you have the right to free speech, and the right of free speech is quite strong. So, I mean, okay, so yes, I mean, I'm assuming that you're not engaged in major criminal activity and have records of it on your phone, but I would encourage you to not bring your phone in if that was the case, and also to not do that. But that's
Right.
the question. So, okay, you have some memes. You're an American citizen. As it stands right now, you have the right to free speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As
So-
it stands right now.
Well, no, but honestly,
I
it's a
know.
real question as it stands right
Yes.
now. I mean,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's why these questions have arisen, and why you hear people saying, "Oh, I took a burner phone, or I wiped everything off my phone before I went," and
Right.
or at the very least, put it in airplane mode.
But if me as an American citizen could say, put up a little bit more of a fight to U.S. Border Patrol, but if a true Canadian crosses and the Border Patrol person wants to see this phone of a true Canadian, no American connection whatsoever, is the standard lower for how far they could see and what requirements they need?
I do think it is lower. I'm just gonna take 1 second to look this up because I'm almost certain it's lower. Hold on, for a non-U.S. citizen.
We need a video of your screen to pop up as you do this.
Yeah, exactly. It is my belief that they can do a forensic search or a non-routine search of a non-U.S. citizen's phone. I mean, okay, so the thing I could take away, I can't find exact doctrine on this, but what I understand is that non-U.S. visa holders enjoy less rights at the border. They would, just by virtue of being on U.S. soil, they would enjoy some rights. I would imagine that there would be some level of protection akin to what a U.S. citizen would enjoy, but I can't find a specific answer as to whether or not a U.S. citizen or a non-U.S. citizen would enjoy the same rights. What I would say is if you refuse to allow them to search your phone, that can be used, if you are not a non-U.S. citizen, that can be used to deny you entry.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's the answer. So it's and I think, hold on. No, I just found the answer. Hold on. Sorry about this.
No, don't apologize. It's really fun to hear your brain work.
Thanks. Yes, So non-U.S. citizen travelers cannot object to the searches if they want to enter the United States, right? And as it stands now, the weird thing about this is that Customs and Border Patrol is also looking at social media. Right. Yes. And so that's an issue because you're a U.S. citizen, you enjoy the full rights of a U.S. citizen, which means we still retain First Amendment rights. And the First Amendment rights are the First Amendment. They're the first for a reason. They're incredibly strong and they were incredibly foundational to the American idea, right? The American experiment. The issue is that we are living in very unprecedented times, right? And so what I would say, if you're a non-U.S. citizen, consider not bringing your phone or putting your social media on private. However, if you do that, there's still a risk that they won't let you enter the country,
Right.
Yeah, and so I think refusal. Refusal might result in a denial of entry into the United States. Yeah. So yes, as a U.S. citizen, they cannot deny you entry, right? You're an American citizen. They look on your phone, they see a J.D. Vance meme, they see a whole file. in my case, a whole album of J.D. Vance memes, and I'm still an American citizen, and you know what I mean? Yeah. But a non-U.S. citizen probably doesn't enjoy those same rights, and they can't refuse to the searches if they want to enter the United States. Why? Because they enjoy lesser rights at the border.
Right.
So them's the facts. But in general, CPB is mostly looking for kind of evidence that the stated purpose of the visit is not what the visitor intends it to be, or whether or not they're engaging in criminal activity, or they're posing some sort of threat to U.S. national security. Now, that's the real crux of the issue. Why? Because what is considered a threat to national security,
Right.
That's the issue. And we're seeing this with permanent, long-term permanent residents, green card holders like Khalil in New York City, who was subject to deportation proceedings because of his support of the Free Palestine movement, right? Which means that he's enjoying a lesser standard of First Amendment rights than, say, you and I, who are American citizens, would.
So we've been talking about CPB. What if you encounter ICE or the police? How do those situations differ?
Well, I can't imagine that you would encounter ICE at the border, but it's possible.
Well, what if you're in the U.S.? Yeah, I guess
If you're in the United States, I mean, what I would say is if you're an American citizen, go up to them and distract them. That is my advice. No, I mean, take up their time. Time is precious, you know? I warn people, shout La Migra, do what you need to do. I mean,
when you're in the U.S., right, you have a significant amount of rights regardless of immigration status, right? You don't lie about your status and don't provide false documents, right? But you also enjoy the right to non-self-incrimination, and you have the right to remain silent, and you do not have to discuss your immigration or citizen status with the police. Do I think they might drag you into a van? Of course I do. Mm-hmm. Of course I do, because that's what's happening, right? More importantly, though, what happens when the officer knocks on your door? Don't open it. Do not open the door, okay? Officers must have a judicial warrant to enter into the home, right? Which is not just a routine warrant. They need a judicial warrant. ICE warrants are not signed by judges, okay? The thing is, when you're scared and you don't know this, of course you're going to open the door, and of course you're going to say, come in. It's the same thing that happened with you in the trunk. You just don't know that you have these rights, right?
Right.
And that's the issue, right? So we need to educate people about these rights.
Right, exactly.
So you literally, you have an American citizen go out there with their passport, and you say, you do not allow them entrance into the home, and you say no, or you talk through the door and say, come back with a judicial warrant.
Okay.
If you're a U.S. citizen, you also have the right to record activity on your phone. You cannot interfere, but you absolutely have the right to record activity with your phone and write down any relevant information about what you're seeing. A lot of people I've been seeing have been asking for birth dates and names. But yeah, I mean, we're living in times in which we're going to have to choose to be brave.
Yes, for sure.
And as American citizens, we're in a much better position than, our undocumented brothers and sisters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Wow. Are you feeling intimidated?
I'm a white male. Of course not.
Oh, this is your time, baby. This is your time. This moment was made for you. But you're a Democrat, so unfortunate.
Always a catch.
Always a catch, exactly. Goodness. Birthright citizenship. It's under threat. At least there are threats that it's under threat. Where do you see that going?
Not well. I mean, this is the thing, right? So why do we have birthright citizenship? Because of slavery, right? Because of the history of the United States. We're a nation born of slavery, right?
Yeah.
And it's integral to the U.S. economy. We, like Michelle Obama said, like, why weren't my children taught that the White House was built by slaves? Like, slavery built America. America became independent, was able to sustain itself because of slavery, right? We have birthright citizenship because of slavery. I think that getting rid of birthright citizenship is unconstitutional. I understand that there are challenges right now, but I don't have hope. I don't have hope for it.
That's scary. But here's a question that might be on many people's minds if we see it get taken down. Would the people who have birthright citizenship now be grandfathered as U.S. citizens, or do they suddenly lose their status? Or is that to be seen?
I don't know, because you and I both have birthright citizenship, I'm assuming. I was born in the U.S. to American parents, right? My father's Puerto Rican, but he was born in New York, and I have.
I don't. I'm the other way around. I was born in the United States, but to Canadian parents. It just happened to be there for a couple of years.
And my mother was born in New Jersey, but my father in Switzerland.
So, I mean, that's the question, right? So we can't really know until we know.
Right.
What I know from history, and this is not being a lawyer, but this is just being someone who enjoys learning through history, is that we're not going to lose our rights in one fell swoop. It's going to be a slow chipping away of rights. It's going to be rationalized. We're going to try to normalize it. They're going to try to normalize it. And they're going to try to, boil us as frogs, right? It's going to be a slow incremental thing. And then all of a sudden we're going to look around. We're going to look up and be like, what just happened?
Right.
So yeah, I do think that there's a possibility that would happen. I do see a possibility that they strike down birthright citizenship, and then they say, okay, well,
those people who were born on U.S. soil but without U.S. parents, okay, that's gone. Oh, and all of a sudden you only have one U.S. parent. Okay, that's gone. Oh, what's really un-American? Descent. All of a sudden you lose your status, right? This is how we know that authoritarian regimes exist. This is how we know that fascism works. It's a slow, incremental chipping away of rights.
Right.
I don't have high hopes because we're in a 6-3 split. And, I don't know if you saw this recently. I think it was like September 9th. I've been busy though. It is the beginning of the semester here. There was a temporary challenge. It was called Vasquez versus Nome, I want to say. And it was an unsigned brief order, right? But basically, the Supreme Court legalized the use of race in consideration of immigration status and roving patrols, right? So
yes,
we're seeing things that we never thought we would see.
Yeah.
I went to law school. I learned that CPB cannot use race as a factor, and theoretically they still can, but they probably do. And I also thought that the police could not stop based on racially inflammatory issue. Like I never thought, like I was taught that the police cannot use race as a factor, right?
Right.
But now the Supreme Court said, okay, yeah, weirdly enough, that there's what they consider common sense indicators, right, of undocumented people, which are employment and landscaping, agriculture, construction, limited English proficiency, race, and other cultural indications, right? That's scary. Because I don't know about you, but there are large amounts of Mexican populations that work in agriculture, work in construction, that don't speak English. Why? Because they're Hispanic populations and are American citizens, right? And so we're not that undocumented people deserve to be swept up, because again, undocumented people don't really commit crimes the way American citizens do. And also, I mean, let's have a heart as a nation, right? People come here to make a better life. It's who we are. What do we stand for? But there are many people that are going to be swept up that are American citizens in this, and it's a really scary and dangerous time. And so now they allow race as a factor, as a common sense indicator of undocumented status. What's next?
Yeah.
Can all Hispanics be stopped? Can everyone who's a Spanish speaker or a French speaker or our Chinese speaker, Vietnamese speaker just be stopped based on the fact that they speak a second language? I don't think it stops here.
Right.
If there's anything I will say, and just like, I think that so my mother is Jewish, right? But I'm not super religious. But I did go to the Holocaust Museum in Israel, #canceled. But I learned there that after the Holocaust happened, they were like, what do people need? What do they need? They need chuppahs. They needed wedding canopies. Why? Because even in the darkest of moments, people were still getting married. They were still falling in love. They still felt joy. People in the darkest of times still find joy. There are still reasons to live. You have neighbors, you have friends, you have community. Show up for them, be a good person, be the person you want to see, love your friends, laugh with your friends, enjoy your life, be kind, be good, be the person that you would hope other people would be for you, and remember to laugh, because first of all, fascism is, they want us to fear them more than anything. They don't have as much power. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said this yesterday. Do not obey in advance. They rely on the presumption that they're strong and that we can't do anything, right? That's not true. And we have to remember that joy is an act of resistance. It cannot be your only act of resistance, but it is an act of resistance.
Right. Well said. Natasha, thank you so much.
I'm so happy.
Well,
I mean, not to tell you all the horrible things the Supreme Court is doing, but I'm so happy to be on this podcast.
No, we really appreciate all you shared today. And for sure, there will be other legal questions we'll want to come back to you for.
And I will still have Google.
Oh, amazing.
Well, you may.
For now.
Exactly.
Or maybe it'll be a different search engine, but yes, but thank you. This has been great. If you live outside the U.S., please register with your voting state at votefromabroad.org every year. Do it now. To find all our episodes, go to democratsabroad.org and look for us in the drop-down menus. I'm Rachel Oikster with David Schellenberg in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for listening to Democrats Abroad, the Blue Vote Cafe.